or has been really busy, has got a lot on his plate right now, but he's taking some time to join us on the Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team. So, Antonio, let's start with this. First, thanks for your time. Second, were you blindsided by this the same way that I was? Conference expansion hasn't surprised me, but USC going to the Big 10 was I have to check to make sure this is legit kind of thing. Was it the same thing for you?
It was. There's been like message board rumors that you can't really take seriously, and Twitter posts in the past, like over the past year since Texas and Oklahoma went to the SEC, like, oh, USC is going to join the Big 10, blah, 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 blah. But I think last year I realized USC is going to be the next valuable piece, the most valuable domino, them and Notre Dame, just because of the LA market and things like that. So I knew they had the potential to do something big. I think their fans have been frustrated with the Pac-12 for a while. I think if their fans had their choice, they'd be independent. So the Big Ten move was a surprise, even though when you look at it, USC had to do it financially.
So on that note, I've talked to a lot of people over the last few days and heard from a lot of people that have said things like USC leaving the Pac-12 ruins college football at its core because of in-state rivalries and stuff like that. But to what you just said, and my very limited knowledge of how USC fans have considered this, does anybody there actually care that they're losing the Stanford game?
They've been partnered with them, and UCLA have been partnered with Cal and Stanford for a while. But I mean, are those schools in the Bay Area, are they really committed to football that much? And I think that's where USC, Oregon, and Washington are kind of stand apart from the rest of the conference, is their attitude and their commitment toward football. And so I think USC, that's where USC fans were kind of frustrated as well, just because the presidents of the league let Larry Scott make all these bad decisions, and he went unchecked for a long, long time, and that showed up in the media rights deals, the revenues, the commitment to recruiting. That's why Mario Cristobal was able to come here to the West Coast and dominate pretty much right away, because he had an SEC mindset that the rest of the league didn't. So I think those frustrations, USC fans won't miss those, and I think they'd appreciate being in a more invested football conference.
Antonio, USC obviously a huge national brand, and even today's recruits aren't so old that they don't remember when USC was the best college football program in the country. What's the appeal of UCLA? That is a team that has not been great in probably a couple of decades in terms of football. They don't have. I don't think they have the same national brand that USC does. Is it just a situation where they wanted to keep USC and UCLA together, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I don't think USC was going to consider a move without UCLA. Really, it wasn't like, oh, we might think about bringing Oregon or something like that. It was UCLA all the way, and on the football field, I don't think they're one of those schools who you have to. In the past, you could question their commitment. The Rose Bowl hasn't been filled up. They've had some bad coaching hires. Chip Kelly is kind of underwhelmed, even though he seems like he's getting it on the right track now. And they're a school who's had massive debt issues with athletics. So this will help them kind of wipe it out in maybe a year or two. But I think their appeal is more the LA market and the basketball program. If you think of matchups like UCLA versus Indiana, or UCLA versus Michigan in basketball, or Michigan State or Ohio State, I think that's where most of their appeal lies. On the football field, I think it's going to take them some time to kind of get adjusted to the Big Ten and everything that goes on the field there.
You know, you talk about keeping schools together. When Texas and Oklahoma first made their announcement, the legislatures in those states talked about maybe, setting it up where they couldn't leave without the other teams, especially in Oklahoma State. obviously politics are way different in the Southwest versus the Pacific Northwest, but there's been that same talk of Oregon and State and Oregon being tied together, Washington and Washington State being tied together. Could that potentially kill that move? Is that a real possibility in your opinion?
There's talk about it, but I don't think it's a real possibility. If that happened, that would really, really hamstring Washington and Oregon, who are probably more likely to work together and be in lockstep than Oregon and Oregon State and Washington State. The objectives of Oregon and Washington are much different than Oregon State and Wazoo. So it's been talked about, but I find it highly unlikely. I know people were surprised that UCLA was able to break away from Cal. They're in the same University of California system, but UCLA was able to get approval from their border regents, and surprisingly, they broke away without much of an issue. So even though it's been rumored, I don't see it happening.
Antonio Morales covers Southern Cal for The Athletic on the Farm Bureau phone line right now. Antonio, quick question. What is the temperature in Los Angeles right now outside?
It's in the mid-70s today.
Of course. Basically every day of the year, right?
Hate you, Antonio.
It's been hot lately. It cooled down a little the past couple of days, but it's been a little warmer lately.
So are you ready, like physically ready to spend November weekends in East Lansing, Michigan?
I doubt it. Notre Dame in October is cold enough for me, and that's not even like the worst part of the year over there. And there's one trip to Washington we had a couple of years ago where we had to cover USC's game in Washington, which is by the lake in late September. It wasn't raining or anything. It was pretty sunny outside, but by the lake, some wind. It was too cold, so no, I'm not ready for East Lansing or wherever else they're going to send USC and have to go cover them.
You got to buy a parka or something. That is an interesting point, though. You mentioned Notre Dame, and I think that's getting lost on a lot of people because when this move happened, of course, the first thought is, well, geographically, it doesn't make sense. It's hard to develop rivalries when you're thousands of miles away from these places and the climates are different and all that. But USC's biggest rival has been in Indiana. So what makes a difference between Indiana and Ohio and Michigan moving forward?
Yeah, exactly. I know there's been talk of the Big 10 has to add more Pac-12 schools in order to make things easier for USC, but I don't know if USC and UCLA want other Pac-12 schools in the Big 10. So the Big 10 is going to have to get creative from a scheduling standpoint and figuring out how to make things a bit easier on USC, but I think they'll find a way and it'll work out, and I don't think USC will mind when the paychecks come.
Real actual football will be played at some point. Is this roster prepared to compete nationally like right away, or is it going to take a little bit?
I think it's going to take a little bit. They're ready at the skill spots, I think, but the line of scrimmage is where it's going to be an issue. Even with Lincoln Riley, I mean, they have like a top 15 recruiting class right now, I believe. Last time I checked, it was like number 12. But that's a lot of skill guys. They need to get some lime, and that's something that kind of eroded under Clay Helton, and it's going to take a while for USC to kind of rebuild its reputation on the line of scrimmage. Francis Maligoa, the kid who committed to Miami yesterday, the 5-star offensive lineman, USC made a push for him, but ultimately he goes to Miami, and they lost a 5-star offensive lineman last cycle to Oregon. So that's an issue they'll need to get cleaned up really quickly, because this is the class that'll be, sophomores when USC goes into the Big 10. So it's pretty much the future of the line, and right now they don't have any blue chip guys there, so they need to get to work quickly.
Only about 60 seconds left here, Antonio, but we would be remiss not to ask you a little bit about Jackson Dart. Obviously, he's going into the fall, and there's a bit of a quarterback controversy still in Oxford. Are you surprised he didn't just come right in and grab that job?
Not really. I know Luke Altmaier was a highly rated kid, and I like some of the stuff I saw from him in the Sugar Bowl, and I know he has experience with Lane, and obviously to take Jackson some time to learn things. I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson earns the job down the road. So I know Lane in the past, even at USC, he's had some of those quarterback competitions going into the season. So I'm interested to see how he handles this one and who ultimately wins that job.
Antonio, thanks so much for your time. I know you've probably been really busy and will continue to be busy with this move, but thanks for making a few minutes for us, and we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
All right, no problem. Thanks.